What time is it? It's time for another Every Other Wednesday.
Zoot Zoot Riot.
Hey, we haven't done the frozen face opening in a while.
No, but that's a good bit.
There's nothing frozen here where I live, including almost anything in the freezer.
What is the temperature there, Richard?
Today, right now, it is 94, which in real money is what, 30 something?
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
Google, what's 94 degrees Fahrenheit in Celsius?
94 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to 34.444 degrees Celsius.
Did you hear that?
34.44.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
got it.
Hmm.
You got it.
Oh,
what a world
Kids
we
were
live
as obedient as Google.
We finally have a relatively smoke-free day, better air quality here for the first. Our air quality has been horrible.
that's good. You know, while we've been talking about the weather, people have started coming in the room. Welcome, everyone.
What?
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, great to see
You
you.
mean this is live? We're live right now?
We're live. We are live.
This
and
could
on
have
air.
been so awkward if we didn't know that.
I know. We don't want anything awkward today because the whole conversation is going to be pretty awkward, isn't it? Yes.
We should just do
It's-
it, yes.
Boys,
Yeah.
it's a day in the life for you.
I'm
but for
already
me,
cringing.
So we do have a question for everyone to answer in the chat. And Sanjay, would you mind telling everyone how to operate the chat if they don't already know?
you type, it shows up.
That was awkward.
There you go. As well, for some people, it defaults to just the panelists and the host. So if you could change that to everyone, that would be fantabulous.
Okay.
Fantabulous.
And then once you do that, what we want to know is, what are you reading? What book are you reading right now? I don't mean right now because you're obviously tuned into Every Other Wednesday, but later today, what will you be reading? So put some
Currently.
Liars Club. Okay. Well,
And the reason we're asking this question is because it is Book Lovers Day today.
today is Book Lovers Day. I'm a book lover. I am reading a book called Truman, and has nothing to do with Jim Carrey
You know what, though,
movie.
Richard,
What?
you just sent that only to me and not to everyone. After I
Oh,
just gave my
sorry,
big
after you just said that, I know.
This is awkward. This is very,
This is
very awkward.
really awkward to everyone.
What?
Oh, now to be
Shelby?
around those who look at Shelby. All right, so now
Oh.
you're reading Truman, which
Yeah.
is
Can
nothing to
we-
do with the Truman
Richard, moving
Show, but it's
forward,
all
Since you're,
about.
like security guy. Do you think we could like block Shelby from attending because she's such
No.
a-
100. I'm giving Shelby 100,000 points.
No,
There you
actually gets 1,000,000 points sent.
Bring Me Back by B.A. Paris, Simon Sinek. Start with Why. Truman. I'm still pushing my Truman. Now, I will tell you, so I'm actually listening to Truman, not reading it. I'm listening to it on an audiobook. It is 54 hours long.
Oh, I did.
Yes.
I did the count. The first audiobook I ever listened to was The Count of Monte Cristo, and this version was 110 hours.
Oh my God.
And I'm so advanced that I did it in one day.
The Soul of an Octopus. You're reading Bitter Orange, the novel, where you are, which is there was no truer statement ever made. Everyone point and laugh at Shell. Oh, that's not a book, but it should be.
No, that's great. That's why she got 1,000,000 points.
Housemaid. Oh yeah, The Thousand Doors of January. You know what I take encouragement from is that so many in our audience are reading something. That's great.
I can read Michael like a book. Does that count?
No, but you can read Michael's books. You can read mine too.
At the risk of being awkward and inappropriate, this pains me, but Michael said a funny in our pre-conference or
I
little
said a
pre-
funny. Did we
Yeah,
write
that'll
it
be-
down?
about with regards to my travel schedule.
Oh.
Are you doing it
Well,
on
let's
the way
get on
back?
with it. Let's get on with it, Sanjay. Tell us what it was.
Okay, I'll set you up for it. So I'm traveling. I'm off to Singapore in a couple of weeks, and Michael said to me, "How are you going?" And I said, "I'm going through LAX, LAX." So I'm going through LAX, and he said, "So are you doing that on the way back?" And I said, "Yeah, that's the plan." And Michael said,
So is that called relaxing?
Yes. Yes, Michael, you're doing the role of the dad joke very, very well.
I know.
Okay,
very
so
good.
let's move into
relaxing. Get it?
the 1,000
"Relax,
January.
don't do it." Sorry.
Hey,
Okay.
listen, but we really appreciate your participating in our question today and finding out what books. So, I mean, one of the things that I do whenever I ask people this is because I always have a book going somewhere, reading, not writing. I should, but I don't. And so I'll look up some of these books and I'll probably end up reading one or two of them. But today, what are we talking about, guys?
Well, what's the
Well,
date today? We're
Oh
out
yeah,
of
well,
practice
speaking of
here.
today,
What is the theme today? August 9th.
Who are these people? We have things to do, Richard, before we get in here. It's August
Okay.
9th, 2023.
Okay. I
We'll
know
just
the
pretend
time
the
I was
theme
being
song
so
played. It's every other Wednesday. My name is Michael Kerr. I'm coming to you as per usual from beautiful Canmore, Alberta in the Canadian Rockies. I speak about workplace culture, inspiring leadership and humor in the workplace, and yes, jerk-free workplaces. And over here to my side is Mr. Sanjay Nath, at least on my side.
You are on my side as well, which is awkward. My name is Sanjay Nath. I am based out of just Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and in a beautiful city of Oakville. I am a speaker and author, focusing and specializing on leadership and performance. Mr. Haddon in the
All right, that would
warm
be
depths
me.
of Jacksonville.
Yes, and I'm Richard Haddon, and I am in Jacksonville, Florida, where I live. I'm an author and a speaker. I wrote Contented Cows Give Better Milk and the sequels, and that's who I am. And it is hot here today, but that's going to change certainly in the next 4 months, I would imagine. So. Okay.
Next 4 months.
Yeah.
That's your weather forecast?
Yeah, that's my weather forecast. Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. And that's why Richard never made it as a meteorologist.
Yeah.
All right, now what are we talking about?
We are, Sanjay, what a segue. We're going to tackle an awkward topic today, namely awkwardness in the workplace, how to deal with awkward situations, whether they happen to you, whether you've created the awkward moment, whether you're an innocent bystander in an awkward situation. We're going to talk about how that relates to culture. And partly the inspiration for this, I'll actually put it in the chat box maybe, is a book I read a few months ago, speaking of books, called Cringeworthy: A Theory of Awkwardness. And it's a very fun book. I highly recommend it. And it is literally that. It's just kind of diving into the whole essence of what makes something awkward and how do we de-awkwardize a situation, which I'm pretty sure is a word.
Yeah, and if all else fails in an awkward situation, make up a word. And that usually de-awkward.
Totally gets rid of the awkwardness right there.
Yeah. So one of the things we want to be able to do is hear from some of the awkward situations you guys have been in and encountered, either so that we can kind of pull an Ashley and point and laugh, or maybe we can offer suggestions that if you find yourself in that situation again, we can learn from it, defuse the situation, and everyone eventually sing Kumbaya.
So let me ask you, gents, have you, thinking back to jobs you've had in the past or your job as a speaker on stage,
Yep.
Have you experienced a really awkward, cringeworthy situation?
Oh yeah, I mean, I shared the stage with Michael Kerr before. Like,
oh yeah, that was awkward.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I have a, back when I had a real job, awkward situation, and then a stage awkward situation. When I had a real job, this was many years ago, and I had become very good friends with this guy, and we were colleagues, and then I got promoted and I was now his boss, and I think that's a fairly common kind of a situation. And then when it came to the salary review, he ended up getting more money than I did, even though I was his boss. And of course, I had to approve that raise, which I did, of course. But it was just a little bit of an awkward situation. Here I was his boss, which he wasn't fully convinced that I should have been, and yet he was getting a raise, which I wasn't fully convinced that he should have been getting. But we talked about it, and we remained very good friends and did a lot of great work together.
And I think stories like that happen a lot, Richard. And that isn't so much an awkward moment as more like an ongoing undercurrent of awkwardness, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I want to jump on something that Yvette just said about personal hygiene, because this was one of my more, not that I had to experience it. However, again, in a
friend, Michael?
No. In a previous job, we had a colleague who, well, there's no other way to put this, just major BO issues, right? To the point where we decided we've got to talk to him because it's affecting the team. It was that bad. So 3 of us drew straws to determine who would have to have this very awkward conversation with him. I fortunately did not draw the shortest straw, so I was not put into that position, but my dear friend Heather was put into that position of having to have that very awkward conversation.
And how did it go?
Yeah, that's what we want to know.
It went better than any of us anticipated, right? And I think that's one of the lessons we often learn in life, right? Is the anticipation of an awkward conversation is often worse than the conversation.
Oh yeah, no, that's absolutely
At least superficially too, right? Because we think the person might freak out, and if when you approach me saying I'm stinky, to your face I'm going to be brave, and I'm not going to necessarily freak out, but behind the scenes I'm going to kind of go question, like going, what the heck, and then maybe I'll eventually shower. So let's go with that, because that is actually a very not uncommon thing.
Right. And
Right,
you see Janet's comment, which I think absolutely hits the nail on the head. Just have a one-on-one. This is not a group. This is not a meet. We've called you together today.
Let's vote. Who thinks he stinks?
Yeah, it's a one-on-one, and get it over with quickly and gently, and in a kind way, I think. But I will also say that it does make another argument for remote work. I'm just saying. Yeah.
So you're saying a one-on-one better is maybe better than surveying the entire staff and saying, who do you think has the worst BO? Like, that shouldn't be the way to go. Is that what you're saying?
I would have anticipated that anyway.
I still like the Ashley technique: point and laugh.
Yeah.
You smell.
So I have a really awkward speaker story that I'll embarrass myself by sharing.
Okay.
I've never shared this.
You will endure the embarrassment again by telling.
I will, and I've had many awkward moments on stage.
I can imagine,
without a doubt. I mean, I've done.
I can imagine, Mike.
But this was perhaps the most awkward, because it's one of the most awkward things one can do in front of a large group of people.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
This would be expulsionally funny.
Was your microphone
It's expulsionally funny. Yes, I passed gas in front of in one of my talks. I was moving in my defense. In my defense, I was moving around a lot. I did this weird hop, and I believe the hop triggered it. And then I had this awkward moment in my brain where I had to consider, how many people heard this? Was it just the front row? Was it just the first 2-3 rows? And it was clear that the first couple of rows did hear it. So I paused and I kind of laughed, and I said the only line that I could think of in the moment, which was actually, I think, to my credit, a pretty good line. I said, I apologize, but we've just been talking about making bloopers in life, and we all have to remember that the air is human.
Nice. That's very
And they
nice.
laughed.
Now, by the way, along those lines, if you are on the other side of like, if you are the one in the awkward situation as opposed to a viewer, especially too, when I've worked with people and training them on public speaking, when there's an elephant in the room, the worst thing to do is ignore it.
Yeah.
Right? Because then it becomes triple, quadruple awkward. And anything you had said in that moment, and I'm sure you got a huge laugh on that, right? But anything you said to acknowledge it would have been funny. And the reason is, as audience members, whether we're in a formal watching situation or viewing life, we kind of, as things get awkward, our shoulders go up and up and up and up, and we're like, we're stuck. And if you don't give us an opportunity to release that, we leave a presentation or work in this physical situation. But if you just acknowledge it, even if you're not funny, it gives people an opportunity to go, ha, and then it just dissipates. So if you trip on stage, you don't pretend like you didn't trip. If there's a sock stuck to you, clinging with static electricity, you don't subtly try to take it off. You acknowledge it, and in any way, whether it's, oops, I didn't mean to do that, or that's not how I rehearsed it. Anything you say will give people an opportunity to diffuse the situation, exhale, and move on.
One of the best things that I ever saw in that was the dear late Rosita Perez, who was a speaker, told a story. I didn't see this happen, but I heard her tell the story. And that was that she was on stage, and her skirt, her under, I don't know, folk, I'm sorry, I don't know what we call these things, but I mean, it was not the skirt that you could see. It was something else that she had underneath, and it had come adrift.
Like a slip.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, yes. If those who wear slips can help me with this, this is awkward for me. But anyway, and it just started coming down, a little bit. And the more she walked across the stage, the more it became apparent. And finally, it came out the bottom of her skirt, and she simply picked it up and lassoed it around her head. And of course, everyone loved her. So
just owning it, right? Either using humor,
make
owning
the best of it. Yeah.
And one thing you can do, even
Thank
that
you,
I think
Louise.
is
the
helpful,
slips.
is
Sorry, I
have a
shouldn't do
few
that.
standard generic recovery lines, right?
Yeah.
That are generic enough to just cover any situation where you can just laugh
Yeah.
at you. Where
Well,
you get up and ask people for a
Right.
standing ovation, right? And they'll give it to you. Just say thank you. Yes, that was me.
Oh yeah, the other one. I mean, a good generic line is like, "That's not how I rehearsed it this morning," or
Yeah.
"When I woke up this
Yeah.
morning, I didn't think this is how my day was going to go."
Is
Like,
it just
it
me
doesn't
or?
matter anything.
Hey, so let's wrap this around before we get too far, and let's get into some further examples.
Yeah.
But before we go much further down, let's tie this back into culture, because we
Yeah.
were talking about this earlier, right? Because what I would suggest, what is awkward for a lot of people in one workplace, in one culture, wouldn't be nearly as awkward
Right.
in a different workplace, in a different culture.
Yeah.
So, for example, a really simple one that we may not even think of awkward, but just giving constructive feedback to a coworker, or pointing out a safety concern to a coworker. Depending on the culture, depending on your relationship too,
Yeah.
that could be very, very awkward for a lot of people. But if you are in a culture where that is the norm, where everyone is required to give feedback on a regular basis, and you are used to both giving it and getting it, then it's not going to be awkward.
That's a really good example, especially when you bring up safety. So my wife used to work for a railroad, and they are very, very safety conscious. And it was so ingrained in her that we have lots of stairs in her house. And if I ever took the stairs without holding onto the rail, she would correct me about it, and she would do this obviously at work. And it was okay to do it at work. They were expected to, they were almost required to. When she went to work in another company, she said she really had to bite her tongue. It was a company that was not quite as focused on safety. And to your point, what was absolutely expected in one culture would have been not very well appreciated in another.
And not only that's from culture to culture, but the timing is different too, right? Because when you're doing, I don't know, you're at the company picnic, this kind of the silliness that you might do there might be very acceptable, but to do that same thing at the same workplace, but on the Monday morning, may not be nearly as appropriate. So timing as well as actual functionality as well.
And don't you think authenticity ties into this as well? If you are in a workplace culture where they've done a far better job at creating psychological safety for everyone, where everyone just feels like I could just be myself, right? I don't have to put on airs. I don't have to talk in a fake way. I can bring my personality to work. Then in a meeting situation, you say something that's, a little bit, whatever, you're trying to be funny, or just something that demonstrates you have a beating heart personality. In a different workplace, in a different context, that could be awkward. But if you've got that authentic, psychologically safe work environment happening, then people just, I think, are a lot freer to be themselves, and that reduces the chances of there being more awkwardness.
I love it. This has inspired me. My next book is going to be called Flatulence in the Workplace: Creating a psychologically safe work culture. What do you think?
Flatulence, BO, and other. Yeah, I love it.
Lovely topics to talk about. Hey, it's what about, you were talking about in meetings, and I just wonder, we're talking, so I don't have an answer for this, but suppose you're having a meeting and someone in the meeting says something that is patently wrong. It's just wrong. And they're not intending to lie. They're not being malicious. They just said something wrong. And you feel it is important that wrong information not be out there. Do you correct them there in the meeting? Do you correct them at all? Do you correct them privately? How do you handle that kind of thing? And would that qualify as an awkward situation?
Oh, I think for sure that's an awkward situation. And as always, my first reaction to that would be it depends. Depends on the topic, on the issue, how serious it is. Depends whether it's something that is critical for everyone else in that meeting to have an understanding on. If it's not, then it may be something you do afterwards and you take them aside. If it's important enough too, right?
Yeah. If it's a matter, yeah.
Right. But if it is something that no, everybody needs to understand that that's not quite correct, then I think you do have to speak up. And again, it comes back to just using good constructive language. You're not blaming somebody, and certainly not saying something like you're wrong, because of course everybody gets defensive when we say that, but saying, that's not quite right. Here's what.
And also, is it your place, and are you the best person to serve the group by bringing it up? Because if I have a problem with Mike, and I know that Mike and I have a prickly relationship, but I also know that Mike looks up to Richard, and it's a really important thing. Maybe
All true facts so far, yes.
Yeah, so there you go. Anyhow, yeah. So don't be afraid to use those other connections to help bridge that gap, because you don't have to. Again, it's a theme that's come up time and time again. The outcome is more important than the process. So if the idea is,
as with so many things,
right, I don't need to say it. It doesn't have to come from me, even if I'm the boss or it is my official title. If I can get someone who is respected by this individual to have that awkward conversation, and that's the other thing too, it might be awkward coming from me. It may not be awkward coming from the other person, right? Especially if a mentor-mentee kind of relationship.
Right.
I've had the opportunity to mentor people, and I tell them stuff that because that's a relationship that it's more difficult to tell a peer.
Right.
So
yeah,
which then the topic of trust comes into this too, right?
Yeah.
You also, though, you said something, Sanjay, that also brought up the idea of, back to that meeting situation. Considering you're sitting there in a meeting situation, considering, am I the best person to bring this up? The danger in that too, on the other side of that equation, is diffusion of responsibility, where nobody speaks up,
right?
Even though somebody
100%.
maybe should,
And it
in that
proliferates
situation.
and becomes over and over.
but so I'm not saying it absolves you of responsibility. I'm saying it instead of the piece of you telling the person, your job should be finding the person that needs to tell that person.
Right.
So it still needs to be done. It's that you're right. It's not about absolving responsibility as much as it's going, where in this wheel am I the best cog?
Right.
And it might be to tell the person because no one else is brave enough, and you don't care, and you have no tact like Michael Kerr, or maybe again you're a good relationship person and you know that this person is close and whatever. So
what do you two think of this technique? If you're in a meeting situation and somebody says something that's just blatantly wrong, are you guys a fan of just this old technique? BS. Does that work?
I would never do that.
No. But I'll tell you a technique that I have learned from someone that I think does sometimes, and it assumes that the person said something not out of malice. I'll try to come up with an example. Someone says, well, we need to do this because this particular roadway that we're trying to redesign, I'm going to do this in Canadian. This particular roadway that we're trying to design is more than 100 kilometers long. And if you know that the thing is only no more than 50 kilometers, and that needs to be in the meeting, you could say, without saying, oh no, it's not. You say, I don't know, is it 100 kilometers, or did I see that maybe it's 60 kilometers?
Yeah.
So, you don't just knock their answer out.
Right.
Completely.
Or asking, and asking questions, right? That's great.
yeah.
Just asking a few questions that are coming from a place of curiosity.
Yeah, but I don't think, because I could see myself stepping into it with this and say, where did you get the 100 kilometers from? But instead a better way would be to say, now, is it 100 kilometers or is it more like 60 kilometers?
Right.
And I think that, I don't know, that lands better with me.
The other thing too is kind of give them the credit. You can say, whether one of the couple of things, you can say, hey, remember earlier you were saying 60 kilometers, but you're saying 100 now. I'm confused. I thought, or what I'm saying is you kind of give them the right answer, or I
Give
know
them the
you know
benefit of
this,
the doubt.
and then you fill in the blank.
That's right.
This is those are great techniques. This is reminding me of one of my most awkward situations I would get into in a former career as a park naturalist leading guided hikes in the Canadian Rockies here. And you would very often get into these situations where there would be a very keen 10-year-old child who would bring up some fact, and the father, the well-meaning, well-intentioned father, would correct the child, but correct the child in the wrong direction. And you're
Yeah.
sitting there going, the 10-year-old is actually right. So you don't, so awkward, because of course you don't want to embarrass a parent in that situation. So
Yeah.
you're always having to decide, is it worth bringing it up? Do I,
Yeah.
how do you deal
How do you
with
even
that?
do that? Carol has asked the question, what's a kilometer? We haven't switched yet. Carol, a kilometer is a very short mile. But another comment that
very
Carol
short
made a little bit earlier, and this is an example that we were talking about in the pre-show. Our audience does not get to experience the pre-show, and it's such a rich 19 minutes or so that we have before we actually start. And we were talking about the old reply, the accidental reply all. And so Carol mentioned that she did a reply all to thank someone for a present, for a gift. And other people said, wait a minute, where's my gift? That can really be, yeah. Or when you mean to forward something, but you instead reply, oh, yeah.
Being
And
so
so-
careful.
Yeah, so that creates an awkward situation. If you have created your own awkward situation, what are some good ways of getting out of that, of kind of excising yourself from that awkward situation? I mean, I think the word apology is always at the base of that, but I don't know what other ideas.
Yeah,
might
but
you
even when you're apologizing too, I mean, the core of it is do you own it, right? Because how many times you get an empty apology, or forget awkward situation, but if you look at in the media, some sports celebrity or famous person did something and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, and everyone goes, that was not heartfelt, because they don't take the ownership. You don't actually have to say the words I'm sorry. They don't have any more significance in the English language if they're not heartfelt. And similarly, you can explain, once you own it, going, hey, I screwed up, and here's why. That doesn't necessarily make it okay. Giving people context and understanding. People are very forgiving when they understand the whole picture. Actually,
So-
they're usually very forgiving,
think?
because
I think most people are. There will always be some exceptions.
but if the reason is yeah, you know what, I stole the money from the orphanage because, well, I wanted to feed my gambling habit, and you're being very honest. You may be honest, but you're not going to gather sympathy. So yeah, I think that's a big piece, is do you own it?
You want to, or do you, as Ashley says,
All right, Mike and I are reacting to the same thing.
fake your death and move to Mexico? Yes, that's when something we need a cringeworthy scale, right? An awkward
That's right.
scale. When it's
That's at the
when it's
very
11
end-
out of
end of
10,
that.
that becomes an option. I'm just
That's
gonna.
actually, given our lovely audience, I want to hear some of the cringeworthy stuff and some of the awkward things, because I'm sure they have,
Yeah.
they're way more exciting. And it's not only necessarily professional. I mean, grade 9 drama, sorry, 9th grade drama, I'll be bilingual. I was doing a play, and I was playing this nerdy kid, and someone was supposed to pull my pants down, and I was supposed to be wearing really ugly, tacky boxer shorts. And they did that, and then their exuberance, they pulled down my boxer shorts with it.
Oh, no. Let's move right on from it, because you can't
Awkward.
unsee that. Yeah. Speaking of that, first, let's acknowledge Rob's comment. All too often you hear, I'm sorry you feel that way, which takes zero responsibility. Absolutely. That is so, corporate law department saying, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, not I'm sorry that happened, and not taking responsibility. What about the awkwardness that can sometimes be created when people have romantic relationships in the workplace? I mean,
Well, I'm
that's the
watching
thing.
Suits right now,
Yeah.
and so yeah, I've seen a whole lot of that. It's awkward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about an example, but meanwhile, audience, if you would please, if you have some examples that you could put in the chat, we'd love to pick some of those apart. This is a situation that I knew of, some friends. It was a married couple. They had a child, and they decided to separate. They worked together in the same department, in the same company, and they decided to separate. And it was an awkward situation with home, because one of them moved out and got an apartment, but they didn't want the child to have to move back and forth. And so one parent would move 1 week to the apartment and the other parent would move to the house. And it was just all of that, but they had to work together. I will tell you, they eventually reconciled, and now they are still together. And this has been several years ago. And I talked with one of them is a better friend than the other. And I talked with him about it, and he said, we just had to compartmentalize what was going on at home from what was going on at work, because neither one of us could afford to screw up at work, even though we had screwed up at home. And they eventually did, as I say, kind of reconcile. But I think that idea of when there are those awkward situations with relationships at work that go outside of work, I think perhaps the idea of compartmentalizing it is one thing that you can do.
You know what? For the most part, I'm not a fan of compartmentalization because I don't think it's sustainable. I don't think you get to be one person at home and one person at work.
Yeah, and that's not really what I was saying. I think that they were saying that our coping mechanism right now is let's work together and let's work well, even though I might feel like I hate you at home. We're gonna do this thing at work. And
So-
I think that's what allowed them to eventually reconcile.
So let me share a story around that. I was part of I was a founder of a software company in just around the .bomb era. So there was 4 of us. It was a husband and wife couple. She was an MBA, he was a PhD, and it was an engineer friend, and then myself. So the 4 of us started this software company that was helped to use to train people in customer service. Anyways, what ended up happening was I eventually left the partnership and they kind of went on, but the husband and wife ended up splitting and it became very awkward. And so we had a shotgun clause in the agreement. And so she shotgunned him. And if you don't know what a shotgun clause is, it works like this. If you have a partnership, so if Richard and I are in a partnership and I want to dissolve the company, I can just buy him out and I make him an offer. So if I lowball him, so basically as soon as I call the shotgun, one of 2 things happen. Either he accepts the offer or he turns around and gives me the same offer and I'm done. So as soon as someone calls the shotgun, the partnership's over. So if the company's worth $1 million and I say to him, hey, Richard, I will give you $100 million for your half of the company. He laughs, takes his 100 million and away he goes. So that prevents me from over offering. Or if I turn around and go, Richard, I'll give you $1, take a hike. He says, no, here's your $1, you take a hike. So it's a legal thing. Anyway, so she shotgunned him. And she also knew he didn't have money and she had money from her family. So she shotgunned him. And the next day he came back with the money and kicked her out. And anyways, but again, so then you have these employees that are torn and do I work for this person? Do I work that? And anyways, it was just a big mess. So yeah, it can work out, and it sounds like overall it worked out pretty well there. But I think that's the minority. That's definitely not the majority.
Yeah.
I love these examples in the chat
some examples,
box.
and they have done just as we've asked. Michael, go for it.
I've seen these. I'm not going to read them all because everyone can read them. But I think I've seen all of these on Grey's Anatomy.
On Grey's
Actually,
Anatomy.
I've never watched Grey's Anatomy. I just imagine that these things have happened on Grey's Anatomy.
You're such a liar.
But it does remind me, the one about the caught in the corporate library. I was back when I was a manager in the government. They were redoing my office. So I had this temporary little workspace in the photocopy room. And there was a little divide between the photocopier and me. So what happened, this is if you're interested in gaining more gossip, this was the prime location. And I overheard so many awkward conversations, including discovering that a couple working in this office was having an affair. And because nobody knew I was there, I'm like in this corner behind the photocopier machine. It was awkward. It was awkward for me.
You know what I like about Stephen's example? Just you can all read it, but just real quickly, he asked somebody. There was somebody he didn't know, and he said, "What do you do for a living?" And it turned out he was president of a company. It sounds to me like, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, Stephen. It sounds to me like this person did not make you feel awkward. That he just kind of said who he was and went on. And I think we can learn something from that, even if that wasn't the situation. I'm going to pretend it was. We've all been in situations where we said something and the other person could have said something to really make us feel bad. And that person chose to be gracious and kind. And I think we can all choose that. There'll be times when somebody will, say something and we could really make them feel worse, but we can also try to soften it for them.
And I think when we are going into a situation where we know it's a potentially awkward conversation, I think acknowledging that and saying and recognizing that even you as the person, say, giving feedback to somebody, that it's just as awkward for you, and acknowledging that and saying that to the person and saying that this is awkward. Let's just call it out. I don't want this to be awkward for both of us.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a little awkward for me. Here's why, but let's try and not make it awkward because we need to talk about this.
And the other thing though too is you can't avoid awkward situations. I mean, it's going to happen. It's not a matter of how do you avoid it. I guess it's more just the important skill is when it happens, how do you deal with it?
Yeah.
And
so
all else fails, use the Ashley technique.
Here's one that's a big one that is really demotivating for a lot of people. So I'd love to get some feedback on how you would handle this situation. Again, let's use a meeting situation where somebody suggests an idea that you know is your idea, or somebody, or in any other context, somebody just takes credit for your idea and it makes you incredibly uncomfortable, probably a little angry. How do you deal with that situation?
Well, first of all, I was the one that brought up this point in our pre-talk, and now you're taking it as if it's yours. I guess it's
not true. It's not true.
I guess the important stop. You're upstaging me. The first most important question is, do you care and why? Because if you don't care, if your ego, generally, when you have a high enough self-concept, a high enough self-confidence, you really don't care because you think, oh, all right, that was my idea, but I'll just come up with another one. And it is usually ego driven. However, that would be sort of my first thing is like, because that's happened to me before. And I actually, if I'm bugged, because sometimes you get bugged, I actually ask myself that question. Why do I care?
Right.
Why is it bugging me? And I usually find that me getting bugged bugs me more than you taking credit for it. But then for me, again, personally, the second recourse would be, I kind of pull you aside after the fact, kind of going, you know what? I felt like you threw me under the bus and here's why. And if it's something that continually happens, then I don't know if people are new here or not, but I have a high level of smart assery. Yes. And so if that happens,
well established.
Yeah, has it been defined? Has it been is the cat out of the bag? So if that happens, I'm going to be like in the meeting going, yes, you know what, Richard, thank you for bringing up my idea. When I told it to you before, though, you forgot this piece. Yeah. And I'm gonna that's again, that's the way I would deal with it. First, I would try to work on myself, kind of going, why does it bug me? Then it's like private conversation. Then it's public humiliation.
Yeah, public humiliation.
So
public humiliation. Whatever happened to that?
So our chat boxes, there are a lot of situations there about romantic relationships, and Janet brings up that it's not so much the romantic relationship; it's when it breaks up that's and they usually do becomes awkward. Another one where somebody thought, everybody knew somebody was having an affair. The two people who are having the affair thought everybody was being fooled, and they weren't. So yeah, I mean, how do you deal with that? Do you even need to deal with that? I don't know. Those are questions.
Well, sometimes it's on you, right? If you just say, okay, this is the way it is. It's not awkward. If they're not uncomfortable with it, I'm not going to be uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a real romantic relationship. It could be someone with a weird sense of humor, or someone all they want to do is talk about Pokemon cards and baseball or any of that stuff. And so it's sometimes the easiest thing to do is just not engage. Right.
Okay. So sometimes just ignore it.
But ignore it, not in this kind of a way. I'm not looking. It's just like really don't care, which is sometimes, often easier said than done. But when you actually get to that point, like I hear Richard talking about baseball again, and to me, it's Charlie Brown's teacher. And so when you can, I mean, it's an important skill is to be able to deflect that way and really not do it like, again, la, 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 I'm not listening, because the more effort you put to try to block them out, the more it actually bothers you. But just legitimately learn to not care for some of these things.
So that brings to mind a topic that I've had often in workshops. around inappropriate humor. So what happens when, and especially if it's a boss, a supervisory,
Yeah, and
says
we had a comment about who talked
Yeah.
about a boss who used a lot of profanity in meetings.
use
and they had to
profanity,
take
yeah,
it.
or a really inappropriate humor,
Yeah,
a really inappropriate joke where people kind of feel uncomfortable, but nobody says something. And so you could, back to Sanjay's point of kind of not letting it bother you, you can certainly at an individual level say, water off my back. I'm not gonna stress about this. However, you're in a group situation in a meeting and you recognize a lot of people are uncomfortable. That's when you've got to make the call, right? Do you
Yeah.
say something to the boss afterwards? Do you pull them aside and say,
Yeah, I think
look,
you do. I think you go, personally, doesn't bother me. In fact, I thought it was funny or whatever. But I'm going to tell you, you're going to find yourself in trouble. I mean, in this day and age, especially in this day and age too, because we've gone from one extreme to the other. Right now, it's like you blink too many times, so you're in trouble. Oh, there it is. Now
There
you're
you go.
stalking me. That was 4 blinks in 15 seconds. That's
I'm sending you Morse
definition of a
code.
stalker.
well, I think people have blind spots, people who people have come up in different times, in different cultures, in different eras and so forth, and they may say something that to them is not offensive, and they don't honestly, I really don't think most people in a professional setting say something intending to be offensive to a particular group, but they
Right.
also might be insensitive to it. And I think it can help just to say, hey, that's
I think you're right, Richard. I think often it comes from a place of ignorance and just
ignorance,
not knowing. If they do know and they're doing it,
And they
then I
continue to
think
do
you're
it.
crossing into the line of bullying,
right.
right? You're using humor as a weapon to demean
And-
people or to,
Intent is so important.
yeah.
Because and I'm sure everyone on the call here has friends that are very politically correct. They never say the wrong thing, but they're sexist, racist, homophobic, whatever it is. But they say the right thing, so they're not doing anything wrong. Whereas other people who don't necessarily have the tact, they might say inappropriate things, but their heart's in the right place. And I'm not saying that excuses it, but I'm saying that intent has to play part of the the information mix here too. You can't just say, "Oh, you said this word, therefore you're a bad person." I think it's not as simple as that. Although sometimes people try to make it that simple.
Yeah, yeah.
I heard of as an example, I heard
Yeah,
of
assuming positive intent,
for sure,
right?
for sure.
But you see what it says, assuming positive intent can be used to
Yeah.
excuse and minimize the impact of some people's actions. I'm curious about Tamika's comment, that's discounting unconscious bias. And I'm wondering if that is in particular in response to a particular other comment. I'd like to know more
Yeah.
about that. Tamika, if you don't mind expounding on that a little bit, I'd like to learn what that is about. Because I mean, I think people can come across as being innocent when they're really not. And that needs to be called out. But I also think there's some people, like you said, Mike, just ignorant. There's a lot of ignorance out there.
Have you been on Facebook lately?
But here's the other thing though too, is the ignorance is sometimes it's just because the times change. So what you would do, what you can say now is politically correct, but a year from now it might not be. And just because you didn't get the memo, you're not all of a sudden a jerk, potentially, right? Or you're perceived to be a jerk because I'm trying to think of something that's not controversial, but and everything that comes to me is around race and labels of people. But
what about sports teams?
oh, actually, well, here, let's use technology. Let's use technology,
Oh,
right? So
Apple or Android?
I'll say something, and my kids will laugh at me, going, "Dad, that is so MySpace, right? Like where MySpace was cool, then it's Facebook. Now Facebook is, and then it's Snapchat, whatever it is.
Threads is the real thing. Yeah.
Right. So if you don't keep up, and even like Google became Alphabet and Facebook became Meta, and these things constantly change. So if you're like, I'm going to log into my Facebook account and someone starts laughing at you, you're like, what? What did I say? Well, it's a Meta account. Sorry. All right. I think that is again, just because people don't keep up with the times, it doesn't mean their intent has changed. They still want to be welcoming and assuming and avoid the awkwardness.
Thank you, Tamika, for your answer there. I think the comments you made about some people being ignorant or when they grew up discounts that lots of the actions we see in the workplace is shining a light on stereotypes and biases some people hold, which are harmful to others. And then I don't understand the next comment, BIPOC and API, I'm sorry. But
BIPOC. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about.
yeah.
So that's the politically correct way these days. It wasn't there like 6 months or a year ago of referring to people of what is it? Personal POCs, person of color. So it's I don't even indigenous. I think the I is indigenous. B is black
indigenous people of color. Okay. All
right.
Thank you. Yeah.
It used to be.
I mean, I think
used
it's
to
a
be
matter
called
of
racial
educating.
minorities,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And
And I
again,
think I think it's a matter of educating people. I tend to assume positive intent until I'm convinced otherwise, or until the other person gives me a reason to believe otherwise. And I do believe, okay, API assume positive intent. And I'm always very open to being educated otherwise, and I hope others are as well.
I think everyone's open to being educated, just as long as it's in what's important to them. Right.
But it's a really important point being made, right? And it's an interesting, fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
And one again,
crap! Look at the time.
circling back to the awkwardness, right? These are for some people potentially awkward conversations, but they have to happen in the workplace. We have to have these.
Yep.
These what shouldn't, in my books anyways, they shouldn't be awkward or difficult conversations. They are necessary conversations that we need to have if we're going to make sure everybody has a sense of belonging and feels included, right?
And speaking of feeling included, we would encourage you to join us in 14 days on August 23rd, 2023, to join us for an Every Other Wednesday.
Why are you talking like that? That's very awkward.
I was trying to wrap it up and sound fancy.
Hey, you know what I forgot? I meant to go get my bonehead. See, that was my get out of awkward jail
Hey, if it makes you
free
feel
card. I
better.
would show up if I did something that was cringy and awkward. I would show up. I would put my bonehead prop on. Some of you have seen it and say,
I've seen it.
I apologize. I like.
Ashley's putting in a vote for the theme song.
I'm a bonehead.
You know, I don't have it queued up, but
If
we
it makes
will
you feel
remember
better,
that. Saying
My-
Shelby
Michael-
too.
when I picture you, I whether you're not you're
You already picture me as a bonehead? Yeah.
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 Hey, folks, we have to go. We have a time commitment that we made to these people, and we will not keep them beyond it, or it could be awkward. Hey, everybody, great. Thank you. Really, really good, rich discussion. I don't think everybody agreed on everything, but I think people learned a lot. I did. And I
Way
think
too
it's
short.
all about,
Way too
way too short. And thanks for everybody helping us make life a little less awkward.
Thanks, folks. We'll see you in 2
Okay.
weeks.
See
Thank
you
you,
every
everyone.
Wednesday. Bye.
Bye, all.